This is a recording of one of our online sessions for parents and carers, which explores support for children in early years settings who have special educational needs, or SEN. This session was co-produced with families and practitioners in our county of Suffolk and is based on what they wanted to know. The Early Years Foundation Stage framework is clear that every child deserves the best possible start in life and the support that enables them to fulfill their potential. So this video aims to build your overall understanding and confidence so that you can work with early years settings to explore and agree the right support for your child. So this recording will explore some key principles of SEN support and early assessment. We're going to look at examples of whole group inclusive approaches which benefit all children as well as those with SEN. We're going to explain what's known as the graduated approach or the graduated cycle of SEN support and how you and your child are involved. And we'll explain what happens if a child needs some more support. We'll look at what the law says regarding support for children with medical needs or disabilities. And we'll finish with exploring some resources which may help parents at home. We're going to be referring to the Special Educational Needs and Disability Code of Practice in this recording. This is statutory guidance which comes directly from the Children and Families Act of 2014. All early years providers which offer fully funded places to 2-year-olds and 3- and 4-year-olds must meet the requirements of the SEN Code of Practice. We'll also be referring to the Early Years Foundation Stage Framework. This is the legal framework for children's early education aged 0 to 5 years. It provides standards for all children's learning and their development and care in early years settings, including those with additional needs. All early years providers must follow the learning and development requirements set out in this framework. And we'll be including exact references to this framework and to the SEN Code of Practice throughout the recording. So let's start by looking at some key principles about support for children with SEN. All early years providers are expected to identify a Special Educational Needs Coordinator, or SENCO. Their role includes making sure that all the early years staff understand their responsibilities to children with SEN and making sure that parents are closely involved. Childminders are encouraged to identify a person to act as a SENCO. Childminders who are registered with a childminder agency or who are part of a network may wish to share the role between them. The SEN Code of Practice says that all early years providers are required to have arrangements in place to identify and support children with SEN and disabilities and to promote equality of opportunity for children in their care. And under the Equality Act of 2010, a child cannot be excluded or denied a place due to health or developmental needs. Settings must provide an inclusive environment. The aims of the Early Years Foundation Stage framework include ensuring quality and consistency in early years settings so that every child can make good progress and no child gets left behind. And also making sure that all settings offer quality opportunities and do not discriminate so that every child is included and supported. But how will parents first know if their child has some additional needs? Children with more complex developmental and vision or hearing needs may have these needs identified when they are born. This may be through a health assessment like the hearing screen test, which is used to check the hearing of all newborn babies. Some other children's needs are identified before they enter an early years setting during routine health checks, which we will be discussing in a minute. The SEN Code of Practice says that health services, including paediatricians, the family's GP and health visitors, should work with the family and to support them to understand their child's needs and help them to access early support. The Children and Families Act makes clear that where a health body believes that a young child has or probably has special educational needs, they must inform the child's parents and bring the child to the attention of the local authority. They must give parents the opportunity to discuss their opinion and let parents know about any voluntary organisations that are likely to be able to provide advice or assistance. When a child is aged between 2 and 3, early years practitioners must do a progress check and give parents a short written summary of their child's development in key areas, identifying your child's strengths and any areas where your child's progress is a bit slower than expected. Where there are concerns or evidence of a special educational need or disability, a targeted plan will be developed involving you and other professionals like the SENCO and possibly health professionals. In addition to the progress check, the Healthy Child Programme checks physical development milestones when your child is between the ages of 2 and 3 years old. This programme check and the progress check should inform each other. The ideal situation is to have an integrated review, but this may not happen for you. Don't assume that the information is automatically shared between these two checks. Parents need to give permission for staff and health visitors to share information. So if you are happy for this to happen, give your permission for information to be shared when your child is having each of these checks to help build an overall picture of your child's needs. And we would recommend that you always share information from both these checks with staff when your child starts at an early years setting for the first time or when they move to a different one. In addition to these formal checks, the Early Years Foundation Stage Framework says that throughout the early years, if a child's progress in any prime area gives cause for concern, practitioners must discuss this with the child's parents and/or carers and agree how to support the child. Practitioners must consider whether a child may have a special educational need or disability which requires some specialist support. And the SEN code says, all those who work with young children should be alert to emerging difficulties and respond early. And the code states that a clear approach to assessing SEN should be part of the setting's overall approach to monitoring the progress and development of all children. All early year group settings, including childminders, can make adjustments for the whole group, which can support children with additional needs and help them to feel included. So we're going to take a few minutes to explore some examples of whole group support which settings could reasonably offer. Visuals are particularly helpful and are commonly used in early years settings and primary and secondary schools too. These can include visuals for making routines clear to all children, and this might be something you already use at home. Visuals can help children to understand sequencing, like what will happen now and what will happen next. Visuals might be images, or they might be real objects which refer to the activity happening now and the next activity, like the spade you can see on screen, which represents sand play. These are sometimes known as objects of reference. Visuals can also support young children to build their independence, like hanging their coat and bag on a peg or putting their lunchbox on a trolley. Visuals are often used to label areas in a room or to label resources, and they can help young children to understand instructions like how to wash their hands. Visuals are particularly important in supporting communication throughout the education journey of children and later young people. In earlier settings, visuals might include the use of puppets or Makaton signs or images to help children recognize different emotions. This slide shows some examples of inclusive whole group approaches which benefit all children, including those with additional needs. Multisensory approaches refers to activities which involve using our senses like touch and smell. In earlier settings, this might include practicing multisensory letter formation in the sand or doing skywriting. Multisensory maths might include using cards for fraction work or building tens. Resources like the Superhero Me template that you can see on screen demonstrate the importance of all settings supporting all children to appreciate their strengths. Uncluttered rooms will help ease of movement for everyone, including those with mobility issues, and having dedicated quiet spaces helps to promote listening and language in all children. Staff can slow the pace and pause in their activities, like for example when they are singing or saying rhymes, to help all children to process the language information. To see how this can work, you may like to watch this video produced by the Family and Childcare Trust. It shows examples of how a playgroup in our county of Suffolk has made adaptations for all children, which also benefit those with additional needs. Whole group adjustments may meet the needs of some children with additional needs, but there will be others who may still struggle. They may have a special educational need, or SEN. So we're going to move on to explaining what that is now and what happens if a SEN is identified. The law says that a child or young person will have a special educational need, or SEN, if they have a learning difficulty or disability, which means they need educational support that is additional to or different from that made generally for other children or young people of the same age. This is called special educational provision. Just to be clear, a delay in learning or development in the early years may or may not indicate that a child has SEN. Children learn at different paces and may plateau for a time and then catch up. Equally, difficult or withdrawn behaviour does not necessarily mean that a child has SEN. However, where a child's progress gives cause for concern, there should be an assessment to find out if there are any underlying factors like a communication difficulty. This could be an assessment carried out in the setting, perhaps using a communication assessment tool like Welcome. Practitioners should consider all the information about the child's learning and development from within and beyond the setting, like the formal checks we mentioned earlier, and this should include the observations of the parents. There are 4 areas of special educational need. Cognition and learning covers difficulties with thinking skills, like processing information and sequencing, and difficulties with working memory and comprehension. Children with social, emotional and mental health needs may need extra support with managing their feelings and understanding behaviour expectations and developing their self-confidence and self-control. Communication and interaction covers support for children struggling to say what they want to understand what is being said to them, and also understanding the social rules of communication. And the sensory and physical category covers children who have vision, hearing and multisensory impairment, and also those with physical difficulties. Individual children may have needs that cut across all these areas, and their needs may change over time. So support for a child should always be based on an understanding of their individual particular strengths and needs. The SEN Code of Practice says, it is particularly important in the early years that there is no delay in making any necessary special educational provision, which means support. The Code continues, where a setting identifies a child as having SEN, they must work in partnership with parents to establish the support that the child needs. Following the Children and Families Act of 2014, early years settings are expected to follow what's known as the graduated approach to SEN support. This involves a 4-stage cycle of assess, plan, do and review, and we're going to look at each of these stages in turn. The SEN Code says that parents should be involved in planning support and where appropriate in reinforcing the provision or contributing to progress at home. The first stage in the graduated cycle is assessing your child's needs. This is where the early years practitioner, working with the setting Special Educational Needs Coordinator, or SENCO, and with you, will have carried out an analysis of your child's needs. So they will draw on their understanding of your child's progress and attainment, the views of you and your child, and if relevant, the advice of external services. The SEND code says, parents know their children best, and it is important that all practitioners listen and understand when parents express concerns about their child's development. The SEND code makes clear that parents' early observations of their child are crucial, and we will shortly be looking at the kind of information that will be important for you to share as part of this process. The second stage is where support for your child is planned, and here the early years practitioner, often with the SENCO, explores and agrees with you, and as far as possible with your child, what support the setting will offer based on what your child needs to be able to do, which is often referred to as outcomes. They should agree the expected impact of the support strategies and also a clear date for reviewing these to check that they are working. So if you are meeting with the setting to agree SEND support, make sure that before you leave, you have all agreed a date for review. The SEND code is clear that plans should take into account the views of the child so that support is person-centered. Let's just take a minute to look at some examples of support which early year settings might reasonably explore with you in this planning stage of the graduated cycle. For young children who may have a vision impairment, support might include the use of toys with good colour contrast or which are noisy or particularly tactile. A setting could use personalised stories or puppets to help support a child to explore books and explore their feelings and experiences, and to explore solutions and help build their self-confidence. Children are often fascinated by puppets and tend to interact strongly with them, and this can help support their overall development. They encourage imaginative play and give children a chance to pretend to be someone else or something else, and this can lead, for example, to them overcoming shyness and fear and encourage greater use of language. Children with mobility needs can be given plates and bowls with raised edges and light, chunky cutlery. And adjustments settings can make to their provision might include flexibility with the environment, for example, rearranging furniture or providing a sensory area. Or it might mean flexibility with their routines, for example, so that a child doesn't need to line up and sit for snack time if this would be difficult for them. These are just some examples. Every child is different and will present with different needs, so it will be important for you to share everything you know about the kind of support which helps your child best. Remember, you are an expert on your child. You've been making adjustments to support your child since their birth. So think about, how do you get your child's attention? How do you help your child to refocus on something if they've lost attention? How do you support your child to prepare for something new or different, maybe a change to the usual routine? And don't forget to share what the best ways are to help your child to calm down if they are upset. Share what you know helps your child, and this includes the best way to communicate with them. If your child has little language, do you use any visuals or signs at home, like PECs or Makaton? Or maybe you use a string of photos to explain a bedtime routine. Now we come to the third stage in the graduated cycle of do, where the setting gets on with putting the SEN support plan into practice. The early years practitioner, usually the child's key person, which we're going to talk about later, remains responsible for working with the child on a daily basis, and with the help of the SENCO, they should make sure that the agreed support is put in place. The final and very important stage in the graduated cycle is the review, where the setting evaluates the impact and quality of the support, deciding on any changes with you and taking into account the child's views. So you'll be looking at what has worked well, what hasn't worked as well as expected, and what the setting can do next to try and help your child make better progress. The SEN code says that parents should have clear information about the impact of the support and interventions provided, enabling them to be involved in planning next steps. So just to be clear, the SEN code says that at each stage, parents should be engaged with the setting, contributing their insights to assessment and planning of support. This graduated cycle of SEN support is an ongoing process, and how long it takes to go through a full cycle and start the next one will depend on the individual needs of your child. For some children who are really struggling, the review may take place just a few weeks after the agreed support was put in place, so that everyone can closely monitor the effectiveness of the plan and be ready to explore different adjustments. Now we're just going to consider a few frequently asked questions. Many parents raise the issues of difficulties with food. Maybe your child doesn't want to sit for a snack, or perhaps they don't enjoy a typical healthy snack that the setting supplies. If your child has difficulties eating, explain to the setting what your child may find difficult and why. For example, tell them if you believe that your child's food tastes are related to sensory processing issues. And share what approaches you find work well. Does desensitizing help? For example, exposing your child to new food slowly at snack or lunch times alongside other children. Or desensitizing might involve learning to grow foods or cook and prepare them. Parents often share concerns about behavior and worry about how understanding and flexible staff will be. Explain to staff any difficulties or triggers which may lead to some more challenging behavior if left unaddressed. For example, perhaps changes to routine is a trigger for your child if they're not properly prepared. Or perhaps they find it difficult if other children get too close to them physically, or if they experience loud noises. Or maybe clothes labels are irritating on a sensory level. Share what you have found helps lower your child's initial stress or anxiety or frustration. For example, maybe you found visuals helpful to explain routines or help them identify and understand their emotions. And share what you have found helps your child to calm down. Perhaps that might be a weighted blanket or stroking a soft cushion, or maybe introducing particular toys or having access to a quiet space is helpful for your child. The Early Years Foundation Stage framework says practitioners must consider the individual needs, interests and development of each child in their care and must use this information to plan a challenging and enjoyable experience for each child in all areas of learning and development. And the framework is clear that each child must be assigned a key person. Their role is to help ensure that every child's care is tailored to meet their individual needs. The overarching principle of the Early Years Foundation Stage framework is that children learn and develop well in enabling environments, with teaching and support from adults who respond to their individual interests and needs and help them to build their learning over time. Children benefit from a strong partnership between practitioners and parents and/or carers. The local authority Early Years and Childcare Service can offer settings, advice, guidance and training to support children with SEND. This includes sensory processing difficulties, support for children with different types of special educational need, for example, communication and interaction needs, support for using visuals with children, the use of Makaton, and supporting children with autistic spectrum disorders. But what if your child is waiting for a particular assessment? You don't have to wait for an assessment to share what you know about your child's difficulties and what support helps best. A diagnosis of a medical condition alone will not make any difference to the support a setting can offer. All support is led by a child's individual needs. An assessment report may, however, clarify a child's needs, but your knowledge will always be key. All children with SEN and disabilities are entitled to an inclusive education. It is not a privilege, it is a right. The SEN Code is clear that leaders of early year settings should establish and maintain a culture of high expectations that expects those working with children and young people with SEN or disabilities to include them in all the opportunities available to other children and young people so that they can achieve well. When it comes to transition, SEN support should include planning and preparing for this before a child moves into another early years setting or primary school. To support this, information should be shared by the current setting with the receiving setting or primary school. The current setting should agree with you, the parents, the information to be shared as part of this planning process. You may find our termly training session or our video around transition helpful, along with information and frequently asked questions on our SENDIAS website. Now, so far we've discussed the graduated cycle of SEN support, but there will be some children who may still struggle despite this additional targeted support. The SEND Code says that where a child continues to make less than expected progress despite evidence-based support and interventions that are matched to the child's area of need, practitioners should consider involving specialists. The decision to involve specialists should be taken with the child's parents. So who might these specialists be? Specialist help might come from health visitors or speech and language therapists, perhaps the community nursing team, or an educational psychologist from Suffolk's Psychology and Therapeutic Services. These practitioners can help identify effective strategies or equipment or programs or other interventions to help support a child to make good progress. The SEND Code is clear that where assessment indicates that support from specialist services is required, it is important that children receive it as quickly as possible. In addition, the SEND Code states that early years practitioners working with children should monitor and review the progress and development of all children throughout the early years. Parents often share concerns about whether the early years setting will be able to afford the support that they believe their child will need. For most children with SEN and disabilities, the early education provider's hourly rate for the free entitlement for 2-, 3-, and 4-year-olds includes an amount to help meet the children's needs as soon as they are identified. The provider can also apply to the Early Years and Childcare Service for an interim additional payment through the Inclusion Fund. This is for funded 2-, 3-, and 4-year-olds with emerging and suspected special educational needs or disabilities. For children with more severe and complex SEND, the setting can apply for early years high needs funding if they have an eligible child accessing all or part of their free entitlement with them. The Early Years and Childcare Service can also organise the loan of specialist equipment. This might be specialist seating or sensory equipment. This needs to be requested by the health professional who may be working with your child and the setting. So this might be a physiotherapist or an occupational therapist. If you are receiving Disability Living Allowance, or DLA, for your 3- or 4-year-old child, and can show the setting a copy of evidence to prove this, then the setting can apply for the Disability Access Fund. This is a one-off payment which the setting can claim from the local authority, or LA. In our county of Suffolk, the LA pays £1,000 to the setting, which is more than the amount required by the Department for Education. This fund aims to help providers to make their settings more accessible for children with disabilities. This might help the setting to make reasonable adjustments or purchase specialist equipment to help meet the needs of a disabled child. The Disability Access Fund does not have to be spent on the individual child. It could be spent on general improvements to accessibility or specialist training which will benefit the disabled child. A child receiving the Disability Access Fund will have clearly identified needs, and so they will be eligible for high needs funding. The Disability Access Fund is not paid for 2-year-olds and 4-year-olds in reception classes. We have more information about early years funding on our SENDIAS website, which may help you. Many parents who contact our SENDIAS service aren't sure if their child might benefit from an Education, Health and Care, or EHC, needs assessment, so we're going to take a few minutes to explain this process. If a child may have SEN which may need support which goes beyond the resources available to an early years setting for SEN support, then the family or the setting could request an EHC needs assessment. These help identify the education, health and care needs which are making it difficult for a child to learn and to access learning. They also identify the support which may be required to meet those needs. The law says that a local authority, or LA, must secure, that means do, an EHC needs assessment if it considers that the child or young person has or may have special educational needs, and it may be necessary for special educational provision to be made for them in accordance with an EHC plan. In other words, if the child is likely to need support which goes beyond the resources and advice routinely available to a setting to provide SEN support. A parent or carer or someone with parental responsibility or the setting can request an EHC needs assessment at any time. Other practitioners, like a therapist or a health visitor, can also raise your child with the local authority and say why they think an EHC needs assessment might be helpful. An EHC needs assessment is the first step towards getting an Education, Health and Care, or EHC, plan. However, if a child has health or care needs but no special educational needs, an EHC needs assessment will not be agreed, as these assessments are all about unpicking the barriers to learning. We have lots of information and videos about the EHC process on our Suffolk SENDIAS website and YouTube channel, which you might find helpful. Now, just a word about specialist settings in the early years. The majority of children with SEND are well supported in mainstream early years settings, including those who may have an EHC plan. Some children may need specialist provision where the service cares only for children with SEND and where staff will have additional training. A specialist setting may be considered as part of an EHC needs assessment or an annual review of an existing EHC plan. But for other children, referrals can be made by practitioners working with the child. They would usually do the referral paperwork with parents helping to complete it. Perhaps your child already has an Education, Health and Care plan that you feel is no longer working. The local authority must review your child's EHC plan at least once a year. This is known as the annual review. For a child under 5 years, the SEND Code recommends that the LA consider a review every 3 to 6 months. A more frequent review like this can be streamlined depending on the needs of the child. The aim of the review is to check that the plan is doing its job in supporting your child to make progress and make sure that it's up to date and current, reflecting all your child's needs. the LA must seek your views so you can share if you feel that the plan needs to change. Perhaps you feel new strategies of support are needed, or new advice or assessment, or maybe you feel that your child would benefit from a different type of setting. Now, many children with SEN may also have medical needs or a disability, so it's important to consider how support might be put in place for them. When it comes to medical needs, the SEN code is clear that all early year providers should take steps to ensure that children with medical conditions get the support required to meet those needs. For a child with medical needs, you could ask about putting together an individual healthcare plan, or IHP. This is different from an education health and care plan. An IHP records the key information about a child's medical needs, the actions that are required by staff to support the child effectively, who will provide that support, and when. Where early year settings need support for a child with a medical condition, they can seek training through the health specialist working with your child. The setting can also discuss with you and the health professional whether any risk assessments are needed, including for emergency evacuation procedures. When it comes to medicines, the early years and foundation stage framework states that medicines must not usually be administered unless they have been prescribed. The Family and Childcare Trust has a range of videos and stories, including regarding children with medical conditions, which you may find helpful. All early year providers have duties under the Equality Act of 2010. They must make reasonable adjustments, including the provision of auxiliary aids and services for disabled children, to prevent them being at a substantial disadvantage. An auxiliary aid is anything which gives additional support or assistance to a disabled child. So this could be a piece of equipment like specialist seating or toilet aids, or it might mean specialist training or perhaps an adaptation to a building. All publicly funded early year providers must also promote equality of opportunity. All early years providers must also provide information for parents on how they support children with SEN and disabilities, and should regularly review and evaluate the quality and breadth of the support they offer or can access for children with SEN or disabilities. So talk to your child's setting if this information is not clear or not readily available. This information should help you when you are exploring and agreeing the right support for your child. We have further information about inclusion and support for pupils with SEN, disabilities and medical conditions on our SENDIAS website and YouTube channel. Some of this is focused on school-age children, and we know that many parents of preschool children like to have an understanding of school processes before their child makes the transition to primary school. We're going to finish this recording with highlighting some resources and organisations which can offer support for parents. Contact for Families of Disabled Children can offer a range of workshops for parents and carers, including around toilet training, encouraging positive behaviour, and money matters, which may help you. If your child is experiencing some sleep issues, Suffolk Wellbeing and Education has free resources, including this advice produced by the Psychology and Therapeutics Service. The same service includes a small team of inclusion facilitators who have produced a range of free resources for families, including this information about transitional objects which may help a young child to feel secure. If your child has some physical needs, you may like to check out the Bumblebee Children's Charity, which is based in Ipswich in our county of Suffolk. This specialist centre works together with families to support babies and young children with physical difficulties. Or you could explore the Cambridgeshire NHS resources and free online learning videos for children with physical needs. The National Childhood Bureau has a number of videos which explore different aspects of play and sharing books together. And the organisation PACEY which specialises in support for early years practitioners, also has information and advice for families, which you may find helpful. If you believe your child has sensory processing differences, then you might like to explore the Humber Sensory Processing Hub or Sheffield's NHS range of free resources for understanding and supporting children with sensory processing difficulties. Finally, the Coram Family and Childcare website has information about support in the early years and financial support, which you may find helpful. This video was made by Suffolk SENDIAS, but every county has an impartial and confidential SEND information, advice and support service.